All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this edition of St. Louis History Live. I'm Mark Sunlove, the Director of Soldiers Memorial. Very happy to have you here today, at least virtually. Safety does continue to be a top priority for Missouri Historical Society and Soldiers Memorial, so many of our programs, such as this one, still are virtual. So thank you for attending. However, if you are in the area and you're interested in visiting Soldier Memorial, the museum is open. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. There are several safety precautions in place. Visitors must wear a mask while in the building. But if you do feel safe, we would certainly love to have you visit. And certainly now for the next 3 weeks to visit the special exhibition, Righting a Wrong, Japanese Americans in World War II, which is the kind of the genesis of this program today, talking about life behind barbed wire with June Iochi Burke, who will be sharing her experiences with us. And an aspect of this that we haven't really looked at real closely, and that is we looked at much of the mechanisms and the process and how and what motivated this terrible history, but we haven't looked much at the personal stories and the personal aspects, at least in the programming. So we're going to dive into that this morning with June and examine what that experience was like. So I want to thank all of the members of the Missouri Historical Society. Certainly can't do what we do without your support. If you are not a member and you're interested, I will be pasting some information into the chat box that you will be able to copy and paste that into your browser and obtain some more information that way. Logistically, just a few details to run through. The program will be roughly about 40 minutes. Then we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. If you do have a question that you'd like to pose to June, if you type that into the Q&A box, I'll be able to find that there, and then we'll share those questions at the end. We'll get through as many as we can. Hopefully we'll get through all of them, but if time permits, we apologize in advance for not getting to your specific question if there's just too many questions. Today's presentation is being recorded. That's an important note. So if you'd like to share it with others who could not attend today for whatever reason, it'll be located on our Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel. And I'll be pasting some information on that as well, a link to that in the chat box. So you'll be able to find that channel and then locate this particular video once it is posted. And there'll be a little bit of a time delay until it's posted there, but it will be up there and shareable to any and all that you think should be watching this presentation. So finally, your feedback is really important to us. We could appreciate it if you'd answer a few questions for us following the program. A Kobo toolbox survey will open in a tab in your browser at the end of the program. Just a few questions there. So if you could take a moment and answer those, it give us some guidance and some direction for future programs, that would certainly be appreciated. All right, finally, I want to introduce today's speakers. First, Lynn Yamasaki, who's the Director of Education at the Japanese American National Museum. I want to thank Lynn and the Japanese American National Museum for partnering with Soldiers Memorial in connecting us with June to enable the presentation of this program. And also, of course, June Iochi Burke, who was born in Los Angeles. She was only 10 years old when Executive Order 9066 came out in 1942. Her and her family were first removed to the Santa Anita Assembly Center in California, and then on to the Rohr incarceration camp in Arkansas. June's going to recount her experiences of life behind barbed wire as a young child. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn. And Lynn, if you'd like to take it away, thank you very much.
Good morning. I think, Mark, you might need to stop share. There we go. Great. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting us and including JANM in this wonderful series of programming for your exhibition that you have right now, the Righting a Wrong exhibition. We're really grateful that we're able to be a part of it and to join you all. So June and I are joining you from the Japanese American National Museum, which you see on the screen here. It is located in downtown Los Angeles in a neighborhood called Little Tokyo. The building that you're looking at right now is designed by Gyo Obata, who is somebody that those of you in St. Louis are probably very well familiar with. And I know that as part of this series, his story was also shared. But the mission of our museum is on the screen there. We are about sharing the Japanese American experience, so about this one ethnic group, but really considering how that connects to the broader American story. And so definitely telling stories is a big part of what we do. We really value our volunteers, one of whom we will be meeting today. June Aochi Burke, as Mark mentioned, was only 10 years old when her family was forcibly removed from her home. And we wanted to, just before we kind of dive into June's story, we wanted to just remind everybody that June's story is one of many. We don't say that there is one Japanese American incarceration experience. There are about 120,000 of them. And so today, June will be sharing hers, and we hope that you are able to further explore others after this. So go ahead and turn your camera on, June, and you can unmute yourself, and we'll get started.
Good morning. Did I make it?
You did. We can see you. It's great.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here and so honored that you are interested in our stories during our incarceration. And like Lynn mentioned, I was one of 120,000. So mine is just one story. I was born here in Los Angeles in 1932. My father came over from Japan in 1899 to work on the railroads here after the Chinese Exclusion Act. He was 20 years old at 1899 when he came over, and he came over because they had stopped bringing in Chinese laborers in 1893. And the Japanese were then sought for labor and came over. So he worked in Montana, Idaho, and Washington. After that, he made his way down to Los Angeles. I don't know how, but my mother came over in 1920, and she was his fourth wife. He had lost two by death and one by divorce. And my mother was there to take care of his 7-year-old son, my brother, Tom Aochi. So we lived in Hollywood area, and my father eventually was a gardener, and he would push his lawnmower down Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard, to cut the lawns of movie stars and producers that lived on Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Boulevard. He also had a pool hall. But later on, as we were growing up in the Virgil district of Hollywood, we would often go, my sister would often take me to see movies. And one day when we were coming home on a Sunday, coming home from the movies, she stopped and said, we looked at this sign on the telephone post. The sign said, we must report at a certain place that we all have to leave our homes on May 7th, 1942. Before that time, I just want to explain that a lot of fathers and even some mothers had been arrested by the FBI and taken away from their homes and their families and sent to places like Tuna Canyon or Terminal Island. or even Griffith Park housed some of the first generation Issei. The FBI had accumulated files on Buddhist priests, Shinto priests, business leaders, Japanese school teachers, judo teachers, and community leaders, businessmen and farmers. And they were the first to be arrested and taken away from their families. My father was not taken away, but there was great fear among the Japanese as the FBI were taking away some of these men. We would hear about different fathers being arrested. So they said, you have to get rid of anything that looks Japanese, all your Japanese pictures. So we gathered everything in our house, plates, photographs, letters written in Japanese. And we had a huge bonfire in our backyard to burn all of these things. And I think each family had a big bonfire in the backyard to get rid of any kind of evidence that connected us with Japan. We wanted to make sure that there was no evidence of our having any connection to Japan. My father was a teacher of Japanese music, and I was also a student of Japanese dancing under Madame Fujima Kansuma. And also we were doing kabuki plays in Los Angeles. So we were very active in the cultural life, the Japanese cultural life in Los Angeles. So they all decided, well, we're all going to go to camp together. So they all signed up as Little Tokyo residents, and we had to gather at the bus station on May 7th to board the buses to take us to Santa Anita. It was uncanny how quiet I remember all the parents were. The fathers were dressed in their top coats and nice hats. The mothers were all dressed with their best hats and the nicest clothes and a coat to go over it. And all of us kids were wearing our best dresses. And it was like going on a journey. And it felt like it didn't, if my parents were upset or afraid or fearful or sad, they didn't show it to us children. There's one, the reason is there's a saying among the Japanese older first generation called the Isseis, and that was for the sake of the children. Everything that was done was for the sake of the children. So for the sake of the children, they did not want to show any anger, sadness, crying, or being upset. So if they were upset, they didn't show it to us children ever. I never saw my mother or father cry or be angry or be upset. So as we boarded the bus, everyone was pretty quiet. I think, if anything, there was a sense of confusion because no one knew where they were going to take us. And I remember my sister saying, she was 1 month away from graduating from high school. And she would say, I studied civil rights and I know my civil rights. I know that they cannot put us American-born citizens behind bars unless we have a hearing. And she said to my parents, you were born in Japan, so you have to go to these camps. But I don't. I'm an American citizen, so I could stay here in my home. So my mother said to her, well, if you stay here by yourself, who's going to take care of you? And who's going to help me take care of your brothers and sisters in camp? Who's going to take care of your father and me in camp? So then my sister reluctantly, under protest, went on the bus and went to camp with us. My brother was a junior in high school at Belmont High School in Los Angeles, and he was looking forward to being on the varsity football team the following year. So all of that was cut short. we boarded the bus, and I remember going through the streets of Los Angeles. And like I said, we didn't know where they were taking us. So it was a surprise when we came to Santa Anita Racetrack. And we all got off the bus and we went through the regular checkpoints, and they inspected our baggage. We could bring 2 suitcases of clothing or whatever it is that we can carry. And I remember, I think my mother tried to sneak in a hot plate and they took that away from her. So then they led us to this pile of hay, and they gave us a bag, a cloth bag, and they said, you fill this cloth bag with this hay, and that is your mattress. So my brother, being a boy, said to me, watch out for the snakes, and would tease me like that. And so we filled our mattresses with the hay and we dragged it, and they took us to our new home. We had lived in a 3-bedroom home in Los Angeles, like I say, in the Virgil district of Hollywood, with 3 bedrooms, a dining room, a kitchen, a living room, and a big backyard that my parents were growing nursery plants. And since he was a gardener. So now they lead us to the horse stalls. And as there was no horse racing during World War II, they took all the horses out and they put us in there. I was in one of the horse stalls, and the front part of the horse stall was what we called our living room. That's where they kept the hay, and that's where my brother and my sister slept. And in the back part of the stall, with a half door swinging, was where my father and my mother and I slept. There were openings at the top of the ceiling, the wall, so that you could hear everybody else down the barrack or the barn. Living conditions were very raw. We had to eat at certain mess halls that they assigned us to. There were 7 mess halls. There were about 38,000 people in Santa Anita, and we were assigned to different mess halls. But as kids, we always managed to sneak into the other mess halls because we were still hungry. My sister worked in the white mess hall, and that's where she met her future husband. He was a timekeeper at the white mess hall, and my sister worked there. And for my sister to go to work, she would have to travel from our horse stall to the bathroom, which was about 3 blocks away. And then she had to go another 3 or 4 blocks to the shower area. And there was a huge room that was cut in half for men and half for women. And she would have to shower and then get ready to go to work. So she was always late, and he always noticed her coming in late. And so she says, oh, darn, he caught me again. And that's how they started talking to each other. And then they had what they call Friday night dances in Santa Anita. There were some very, very nice people who came to help out at camps. There was a high school teacher in one of the neighboring schools in Arcadia that would bring band instruments into camp for the boys to learn how to play music from Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Glenn Miller, and Tommy Dorsey. And they had a regular band playing in the grandstand on Friday nights. And the young people would dance, and we kids would watch them dancing and try to copy them and imitate them and learn how to do jitterbug and swing dancing. My sister boyfriend, Art Morey, was soon sent to Amache, Colorado, one of the 10 relocation, they called it in those days, relocation camps. And he was being sent to Amache, Colorado. And then in October, our family was, we found out we were going to be sent to Rower, Arkansas. Well, we never heard of Rower, Arkansas. I didn't know where that was. It just sounded like someplace foreign to me. But on the train ride, it took us about 4 days to get to Arkansas as we went through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, and then we finally got to Arkansas. Rower was close to Pine Bluff in the southern part of the state, and it rained a lot. And before the camp was built, it was a cotton plantation. So it was very rainy. The soil was very rich. They cleared out the cotton plantation and built these barracks. And the people in Arkansas were very afraid of the Japanese because they thought that we would, if we escaped, we would kill people. So they said, no, you don't have to worry. There will be guards at every tower, and they will be behind barbed wires so that they can't escape from camp. That's the picture to the left is the block that I lived in. There's 6 barracks on one side, and the building on the other side is the mess hall. That's where we all took our meals and we all ate in the same mess hall. They would ring the gong at 7 in the morning, 12 noon, and at 4:30 at night. And if you didn't eat then, you didn't eat because you couldn't cook in your own room. You had to go to the mess hall to eat. And the family structure was sort of broken down at that time also because we ate with our friends, and I hardly ever ate with my family. I didn't know where they were, and they probably didn't know where we were either, but they knew we were in the same mess hall. We just ate at different tables. If you had a good cook, your food was good. If not, your food was terrible. But the barracks, we lived in this barrack here, the 3rd barrack, and each barrack consisted of 6 rooms. The 2 on the ends were for large families of 4 or 5 people. And then the next 2 rooms in were for couples, like 1 or 2 people. And then in the middle, there were 2 rooms, and each room held about families of 3 and 4 people. So we lived in block 14. I think there were about 36 blocks. We lived in block 14, barrack 10, unit A, and that was our address. Our family number was 3506, and that was our family number, identification number for during the time we were in camp. Excuse me. The lower picture shows flood in camp. We had several floods in camp. It was a very rainy place. And to me, all I remember about camp was the colors of gray, black, brown, except the sunsets were very beautiful in Arkansas. I love watching the sunset. The earth was very, very deep brown. And my mother said, you can grow anything. So she planted strawberries and morning glories and night glories. She planted different kinds of vegetables behind right by our unit. So we grew up with, I think at my age, all we did was look forward to playing with our friends. We never stayed inside. Of course, there was no computers, no iPhones. We read a lot, but we went to the library and went to school. But most of our time was spent outdoors playing with our friends. We made a lot of friends in camp, and the boys, in order to play football in camp, they would take cardboard and they would put it under their shirts, under their t-shirts for shoulder pads. And they would take the cardboards and put it on their inside their pants for leggings. And they would get newspaper and crush it all up, crumble it all up, and put it inside their knitted hats. And that was their helmet. And that's how they played football, the young kids in camp. And they were always outside playing football. We, that to your left is a picture of our 5th grade school. There's a teacher, Mrs. Pysak, and her son. They lived in camp. We had a lot of teachers come from Oklahoma, Arkansas, probably Missouri and Mississippi, who came and lived in the camp and were our teachers. I had a wonderful teacher in 6th grade who was a great, her name was Mrs. Fox, and she was a great English teacher. And she really drilled into us sentence structure, diagramming, and things like that. So I always was grateful for her teaching us and keeping us engaged in learning how to our English classes. And so you'll notice that some of the girls have the same clothes on. That's because the government allowed us to buy certain clothes out of the Sears catalog. So they were sort of like, we had a choice of maybe 3 or 4 different styles. So a lot of us would end up having the same dress on. And the shoes were either boys or girls shoes, depending on if you're a boy or girl. And we all seem to have the same clothing on. And and everybody had nicknames. The Japanese names were so difficult to pronounce that we used to laugh at our teachers who could not pronounce our Japanese names. And we ended up, a lot of us, choosing American names for ourselves. And so I ended up being June. My sister gave me that name. And my sister took the name of Kay. And so then if you didn't have an English name and you had a Japanese name, you ended up with a nickname. And so a lot of times after camp, we would say, oh, do you know Jean? And we said, no, we don't know who Jean is. And they would say, they would describe her and we would say, oh, Peanuts, that's Peanuts, and things like that. That was really silly, but we had nicknames for everybody. I think, there was names like Turn Up, Blockhead, or crazy names. And those stayed with us. The picture to your right is our Japanese dancing class under Fujima Kansuma. She was sent to the same camp, Roar. I have to mention that Madame Kansuma today is 103 years old and still teaching Japanese dancing, actively teaching Japanese dancing. She's a healthy 103 years old. But in camp, she was in her early 20s and excuse me. We performed in camp and we would travel to Jerome, Arkansas, the other camp in Arkansas, and perform there. And this is a picture of our performance in Jerome, Arkansas. A lot of the dresses were made by our parents. My mother, she would stay up all night sewing by hand Japanese kimonos and my Japanese obi. And it was in camp, I think we all had a lot of time on our hands. And so as kids, we all learned how to sew, we learned how to knit, we had to learn how to crochet, and some of us even had to learn how to make our own dress patterns so that we could make dresses. And I was always interested in either sewing or knitting. And they even had craft classes for us kids to learn how to do woodcrafting, but I never learned that. So there was, like I say, plenty of time in our camp that we had a lot of leisure time to play outside. And we played volleyball till it was time, till it got so dark we couldn't see, and it was time to go to sleep. I have to mention, I think I forgot, in Santa Anita, they had what they call night bed check. My brother would stay away from our horse stall because it smelled so bad all day long. And the only time he would come home is at night because we had to be in bed by 9 o'clock. And then there would be a man who came around to put a flashlight on our faces at night and make sure that each one of us were in our bed. And then it was lights out, and they had searchlights going all over the camp, making sure that no one is trying to escape. And so some of the searchlight would wake us up in the middle of the night. But here in Arkansas, we didn't have that. We didn't have bed checks, and we didn't have searchlights, but we did have armed guards, and we did have barbed wire fences all around us. My sister, who graduated from school and camp, now wanted to go outside of camp. So she applied to go to school in St. Paul, Minnesota. And if you were accepted by a school or a university, you were allowed to leave camp. So in Missouri, my future brother-in-law was accepted by the Washington University of St. Louis. And he was a student at the University of California in Berkeley when the war broke out. And he couldn't finish his schooling there and went into camp. And he wanted to finish his education and applied to colleges. And there was the Central Washington University in St. Louis was very kind and generous to accept a lot of the Japanese students into their school so that they could leave camp. So that's where he went. My sister was able to go to St. Paul, Minnesota, because the American Friends Society, the Quaker organization, sponsored her, paid for her train, paid for her living expenses in St. Paul so that she could attend the beauty school in St. Paul, Minnesota. Then later, my sister and my brother met up in Detroit, Michigan, and got married there and raised their family in Michigan and stayed there the rest of their lives. They did not want to come back to California. We were able to go to Denver, Colorado. But in the meantime, in camp, there was a baton twirling class that I took, and we were allowed to order batons into camp, and my girlfriend Takayo was teaching baton twirling, so that was exciting for us. That's a picture of my sister in front of our unit in camp. We had one window, and like you could see the screen door. The blank area, my mother was able to plant morning glories and night glories. So this was early picture of camp. That's my brother to the left, to the right of the screen. He was 16 years old, and he was working for the commissary. And part of his job was to drive with another man to McGee, Arkansas, to pick up ice for the camp. But since they were from the concentration camp, they were the last to be served. So in the meantime, they would walk through the town of McGee and take in a movie or go shopping. And he found a hat, a zoot suit hat that he wore all the time in camp. And whenever I would see him dancing in the mess hall, the lights would be darkened and us children would peer through the glass window and try to see who's dancing with who. And I could always spot my brother because he had that zoot suit hat on. and he had those pants made special for him into a zoot suit style by a lady in camp. And so he enjoyed his the days in camp also. At dances, they had a lot of social dances. And, you know, even things like proms, they would have proms in camp, a prom queen, and things like that. The parents all, like I mentioned, try to keep everything as normal as possible for all of us children. This part, and even our education, we had very good education, and we also had a lot of club activities after school, craft classes. I was in a craft class. We had naturally the baton twirling class was my favorite class to be in after school. And we even performed at the football games, which was a big thrill for me because I have always wanted to be a majorette. And in fact, before we went into camp, I made my mother buy me majorette boots because I did not want to wear those ugly brown boots that everybody else was wearing. So we enjoyed. One day, I have to tell you a story. As we were growing up in camp, later on, the guards were more relaxed. And one day, I remember a couple of times, our friends, there were about 6 or 7 of us kids. We stretched apart the barbed wire fences and we snuck out of camp. And we waved to the guard, you know, and he saw us leaving. And we walked about a mile down the road to Rower, the town of Rower. But before we went to the town of Rower, we stopped at the swamps to play. And they had little baby snakes in the water. I remember seeing that. And the boys would pick up the snakes and they would throw it at us girls. And we go screaming out of the swamps. And then we walked to the nearest town of Rower. And the store that we went into had a gas station pump outside, one pump. And inside the store, he had no floors. It was just a dirt floor. And he had one kind of a chest. I guess he had ice in there. So my girlfriend bought 1 can of soda from him. And I asked for ice cream. And he said, "We don't sell ice cream." And I was shocked. I thought, oh my God, I could buy ice cream in camp. But the people in Rower were so poor that they didn't have ice cream out there. And we walked back to camp and we would stretch apart the barbed wire again, wave to the guard and walk inside. And I don't think even our parents missed us. They probably thought, well, we're going to come back for dinner anyway. So we were able to sneak out of camp and go outside of camp a few times with our friends. The older men, like my father's age, they would walk into the wooded section of our camp to find tree stumps or tree roots, and they would bring it back to the block. And we had a teacher, a wood carving teacher that lived in our block. And he would teach the men how to carve beautiful wood carving art. And I don't know what happened to all this art. Some of it is saved in some museums. Different camps had different carvings done that are just absolutely gorgeous. And some people made pins out of wood. We even used we had spoons from our ice cream spoons that we would paint on to make little pictures. And we like I said, we had a lot of time. So anytime we ate watermelon or cantaloupe, we would save the seeds and wash them and dry them. And then we would string it, all the seeds together. And we then paint it with our nail polish. And then we would put it around our neck or our wrist. And that was our necklace made out of cantaloupe seeds or watermelon seeds. And the peach seeds, the little tiny peach seeds, were made into the men would drill a hole through it, and then we would sand it down and make little rings for ourselves, peach rings, or we would sand it down and make it into little turtles or rabbits. And I have one of our rabbits into the Japanese museum, and I can't find my turtle, but we did things like that to pass the time. There was always something to do. Our parents would always give us something to do. That's a picture of the back of the truck as I was leaving camp. That was the last scene of a rower as I was leaving camp. I was sad and happy at the same time. It was like, I was sad to leave all my friends in camp, but yet we were going to go to Denver, Colorado. They gave every person a train ride ticket to wherever you wanted to go, plus $25. And our family chose to go to Denver, Colorado. My father had some friends there. So I didn't know what was going to happen in Denver. To me, Denver sounded like a place of cowboys and Indians and a mining town. And so I was kind of apprehensive leaving camp, where I felt that we were secure with our friends. And it was sad leaving camp. On the other hand, this was our freedom, that they were giving us back our freedom. And, you know, there was a haiku poem that says, "Little did I realize how precious freedom was until you are penned up and behind bars." And that's so true. We don't realize how valuable our freedom is, and hopefully no one will ever have to go through this kind of experience again. A lot of my friends' fathers were still held in places like Tuna Canyon, and I'm working with the Tuna Canyon Project to interview the descendants of Tuna Canyon to hear their stories. And they have some very, very sad stories to tell about being separated from their fathers. So my story, I was at least with my parents, my father and my mother, my brother and my sister. And my brother, one of my brothers volunteered for the 442 and was sent to Europe. And in his letter to my mother, I read it to her. He said that he wanted to volunteer to fight because it was important to show our loyalty to the United States, and also not to be called Japs anymore. The other, I think he was in Company M, and Company M of the 442 was the company that helped to liberate Dachau. And I have pictures of him in the hospital with his buddies, and my brother was one of the lucky ones to come home. There was just one more story in our block. If you had somebody serving in the Army, you hang a blue star. If you had somebody killed overseas, you were given a gold star. And in our family, Cos Seidel lost two brothers in the war, and so they had two ghost stars in his window, and he tried to volunteer, but they wouldn't let him volunteer. And one of the brothers wrote to the father, "Don't ever let anyone tell you that George died in vain. He did it because he loved his country." And then 2 days later, Calvin, who wrote the letter, was killed in action. Those letters are at the Japanese American National Museum. And I hope you get to visit the museum one day and read those letters for yourself in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, June. Thank you for sharing all the, the details and all the stories that really put life into this story, right? So it's more than just the small, interesting aspects of this. Especially your brother, he looks like a fun guy with his zoot suit hat and his pants that he had made. And it looks like he knew how to have a good time.
In St. Louis, a jazz town, I want to tell you that swing music and jazz music was very popular in camp.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a story of the perseverance of the human spirit, right? Even in those conditions to make the best of it and to not lose your sense of livelihood, I guess. We do have a question related to that. And I think it's more about trying to better understand the security in the camps. And it was asked, there was surprise that you could go into town and that your brother had gone into town to buy a hat. So apparently there was some freedom of movement, albeit probably limited. Can you explain that a little bit better? How much freedom of movement you had and how much you can remember of that?
There was really no freedom of movement. My brother was working for the commissary, so he was sent out of camp to buy ice for the camp. And he was an older man, and the two of them, being from camp, were the last to be waited on every day. So then that gave him time to wander around. And he was surprised that in Arkansas at that time, he could not go into the colored section of the bathroom or the theater. He had to sit with the white, and he couldn't get over that. Neither could my father, who was given a special pass one day to go to Little Rock, Arkansas. My father said he just could not understand how an enemy alien of war could be treated better than at that time the Black population, and he was aghast. He was just so shocked at that.
And then another question, and you addressed this a little bit in the beginning, but did you ever get a true sense of how your parents felt about the incarceration and how all this went down? I know that they didn't display that, especially when you were a child, but did any of that come out later in family conversations? Or
no, they never talked about camp to us kids. They never expressed any kind of I've never seen my father or my mother be upset or angry or anything. I think they said, you must keep your dignity at all times. You cannot you cannot be defeated in your spirit. So this was very strong in them. And that's what they wanted to show us kids, I think. They wanted to show that no matter what the circumstances are, you can overcome it by being strong yourself. And I think that was a gift that they gave to us. Even after camp, they never talked about camp. And we don't talk about it with our family either. It's just something that that you don't want to burden your children with. And you want them to look forward. You want them to get an education, and that's the primary importance. And so, no, they never did express any upsetness of being sent to camp.
Kind of a follow-up question to that, June. It seems like your siblings were a bit older than you. And you said your sister had, had studied through high school and had learned civil rights. And did she have, was she frustrated, angry? Did she express a lot and knew that this was wrong? I mean, because there were a lot of people when this event was going on that knew this was not the right thing to do, and that knew that it was clearly unconstitutional, which later the Supreme Court verified in a unanimous decision that this was not constitutional by any stretch of the imagination. And so did she harbor a lot of resentments and anger and through the event and then afterwards as well? Or
she was angry from day one. And she when she moved to Detroit, Michigan, they got married. She and her husband vowed never to return to California again, because you get kicked out once, you're not going to get kicked out again. So they raised their family in Michigan. There was less prejudice in the Midwest and East against the Japanese, and your job opportunities were better than facing discrimination again in California, which was still prevalent even after the war. And so, yes, she was very angry. There was cases like Min Yasui. I worked for Min Yasui, who fought the curfew law in Oregon, and he lost the case, and he was sent to solitary confinement for 9 months in a prison in Portland, Oregon. So he was one of our most outspoken heroes, or Martin Luther King, as you might call him, who really spoke out for civil rights, not only for the Japanese, but for Indians and Latin Americans, for the Black community. He was a real civil rights fighter, a real fighter. And so he's honored with a day of Min Yasui Day in Oregon and also in Colorado. Yes, there were 3 cases that went to the Supreme Court to try to right this wrong. They lost at first, but finally were able to prevail. And of course, the redress letter, the letter of apology that came out years later from President Reagan and President Bush at that time. Those are certain, it's interesting that those were fought by the children of the children. Even I did not want to fight for that redress, but the younger generation, I think they learned from the civil rights organization that you could fight for your rights. And so they fought for the redress and the apology. And it was incredible when I heard the redress letter that President Reagan read over the news. I heard it coming home from work one day, and I just burst into tears because I didn't realize that I felt so strongly, but I felt so bad, so sorry that my parents were now gone, and they were the ones that suffered, not me. So this apology I felt was more meant for our parents, not for our generation. But yes, the government and Senator Inoue said, only a great nation as the United States would have the courage to admit a wrong. You never see any other nation ever admit a wrong. So that was incredible. It was incredible.
After this, June, the question is that you strike me as a remarkable woman, apparently not harboring any ill will for what your country did to you and your family. What have you done with your life in the 75 years since the war ended until today? What?
Well, I have 5 children. I'm married. We have a very nice family. My other younger brother, who's at that time was 16, Yas, is now 95 years old and still in good health. And he remembers a lot about camp too. So he confirms what I remember, and we both remember similar programs. And I said, well, where did we hang? We didn't have a closet. Where did we hang our clothes? He says, well, we pounded nails into the wall, and that was our closet. Or we had suitcases under the bed that we used as drawer. So he helps me remember things too at his age. And my sister is now no longer alive, neither is my older brother, who served in the Army. But their stories still resonate with me as I remember them, what they said to us, recalled. And of course, my friends and I, we talk. Whenever I see anybody from camp, it's always, oh, what block were you in? What camp were you in? What block were you in? And things like that. It's a reminiscence.
Yeah. Well, it's remarkable how some of that ends up ingrained in your memory, right? The house number, the block, you know, the unit number, the block number, all of that is as sharp as ever. That type of detailed information that doesn't leave you. And you probably have not let your brother forget about teasing you with the snakes either, I imagine.
There's a lot of that going on, you know, brothers and sisters. I think, you know, the older brothers and sisters are always teasing and trying to scare you. And it's like, you know, don't put your hands out of the bed at night, because if you touch a rusted nail, you'll get lockjaw, you know.
I have two older brothers, so I have some empathy for them. I know what that experience is like.
I mean, you believe everything they tell you, right? So, you know, with your you don't dare put it outside the blanket because you don't want to get lockjaw.
Yeah, and we did talk a little bit yesterday about the difference in, and I think this has been documented in other places too, but the difference in experience in the camps for children versus adults, and you talked about that, how it was so unique to have so many kids around your age, right?
We had, I think the ages from 10 to 13, all you did was play with your friends. I think the younger children, maybe 3 or younger, or 4. I know that, you know, being taken away from your toys and your favorite bed. I know for me, it was hard to leave our dog too. We couldn't take pets with you to camp. So those were left behind. Fortunately, our neighbors said they'd take care of our dog, but those were traumatic moments for little kids who didn't understand what's going on, and they might see their mothers and fathers crying. It was very traumatic for them. Our age, we sort of understood what's going on. All we want to do is go outside and play, and we had so many playmates. And then the older generation, my sister, my brother's generation, they were the ones that were hurt the most because it affected their schooling, their careers. And I think, like you mentioned, the Washington University of St. Louis was one of the few places that accepted college students out of camp. And that was really very, very, I think that, you know, a lot of young people went to Chicago, New York, St. Louis, and places like that, where there was less discrimination and better opportunities for them. So in a sense, they're very grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it was interesting. I was going to ask you about that, because one of the photos had the puppy in it, and that had come up in conversation with Rod Henry, who is Richard Henry's son, and that was part of that became a very important part of their family psychology, I guess, was that sadness of losing those pets. And pets always then, after the war, were very important to the family, and very tight bonds with the pets, but based on, like you said, that trauma of leaving those pets behind with no choice. Just, yeah.
I remember my girlfriend saying her pet dog was poisoned in their driveway and there. And she cried and she says, why did they do this to my dog? He's not even Japanese. So there are, I think pets are so, I mean, I have a dog now, and the bond between a pet and a child is so ingrained in your memory that certain things like that are very traumatic. I would imagine for little children who didn't understand why you couldn't take your pet into camp, or you had to leave your dog behind or your cat behind. Yeah, that's true.
We got one more question, June, and then I think we're pretty much out of time, but did your parents ever receive any financial reparations for their losses? I think.
Well, yes, the redress gave $20,000 to every living incarceree, which meant that if you were born in camp, you got 20,000. But like my parents were both gone, so we didn't get anything for them. But I got 20,000, and my brothers and my sisters. If you were alive on the day that President Reagan signed that letter, then you got $20,000. And
I think the important part of that is that comes, I think, about 40 years after the fact. And like you said in your talk earlier, at the end of when you were being released from the camps, it was $25 in a train or a bus ticket. And that's, you know, when you look at that in light of what your parents had built up to that point, as far as, you know, businesses that, you know, the small, you know, grass cutting and landscaping business that he was running, all of that never was compensated for. That was all gone, and had to do that rebuilding after the war on that little bit of
and that's a sad point, that by the time my father came out of camp, he was so much older and it was harder for him to get started. So he had to get a job as a janitor. And my mother also got a job as a janitor. I got a job as a dishwasher for room and board. But you have to just keep going strong. And you can't let things get you down. You just have to keep persevering and hoping that things will get better. And they did get better for a lot of us, most of us, I would say. And even my sister and my brother, who lived in Michigan, they raised their children in Michigan. And my niece, their daughter, became the Senate secretary and worked for Governor Engler as the chief of staff. And there was success on the other end of their struggles. And the children succeed like that gave them a great measure of satisfaction that they had made the right choice living in Michigan.
Yeah. Well, June, I want to think we're a little bit over time now. I want a deep, heartfelt thank you for sharing your story and getting this information out there and letting people know firsthand account is so extremely valuable. So thank you very much. And thank you, Lynn, and the Japanese American National Museum for partnering with us, with Soldiers Memorial and Missouri Historical Society to help make this happen. We have Righting a Wrong up for another about 2.5 weeks, but it is wrapping up to an end. And this is actually our final related program that we were having in conjunction. So I can't think of a better way to wrap up the educational programming for this. But so thank you, Lynn, and the Japanese American National Museum. And thank you so much, June.
Thank you for doing this program. It's very, very important to keep the stories alive so that people can get educated. And I thank you for doing that for us.
Thank you. Everybody have enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.